Hey everyone, Happy New Year, and we want to say Happy New Year and welcome to the very first Radiotopia Presents of 2024. It's a series that we are truly excited about. It's called Shocking, Heartbreaking, Transformative. Now, this is from documentarian Jess Shane, who put out an open call on Craigslist and then worked with 4 strangers to explore the standard rules that documentarians and journalists use to tell their subject stories. So the series gets into all sorts of questions about what happens when people's real lives are collected, edited, and consumed. The show pulls back the curtain on what goes on behind the scenes of your favorite nonfiction shows. And then it turns in on itself and some really interesting twists and turns along the way in the making of the show. I've gotten to know Jess a little bit over the making of this show. Every time I chat with her, there's a new wrinkle to this story. It is really incredible. So go check out the new Radiotopia Presents series, Shocking, Heartbreaking, Transformative. It is out now on your favorite podcast platform. Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avirgan. This day, June 29th, 2008, it was actually June 30th, 2008, Hillary Clinton raised $6.2 million in one day, which was the most money raised in a single day that cycle and part of a growing trend in political fundraising that was called and has come to be known as the Moneybomb. These are big efforts driven by online donations to raise as much money in one day, both a fundraising effort and, as we will discuss, a bit of a PR effort as well. Now, listeners, is it a coincidence that we are doing an episode about incredibly successful fundraising just as the annual Radiotopia fundraiser is wrapping up? No, it is not a coincidence. Let this episode serve as a subtle reminder that small contributions can go a long way to supporting the things you love and making a difference in this world. I will now shift out of fundraiser mode, go back into actual conversation mode. I promise this is an interesting topic that we probably would have done anyway, and we've been meaning to get to for a while because the money bomb, it really did change the way that we think about campaign finance. So no more subliminal advertising about the Radiotopia fundraiser. Let's get on to it. Here to discuss, as always, are Nicole Hemmer of Columbia and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hello, Jody.
Hey there.
Actually, if you play this episode backwards, it says donate to Radiotopia, donate to Radiotopia.
It gives you the URL.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly. $13 a month. So I think we're hooking this to Clinton, and that was a big moment in the 2008 campaign. But NIki, if we want to talk about money bombs, I think we have to start with Ron Paul, right?
Yeah, I mean, Ron Paul is really where this idea of the money bomb as both an intensive fundraising effort and as a headline grabber comes from. He had let's call them a very online voter base / fan base. He was kind of a cult favorite, particularly of young men in their 20s, 30s, 40s who had more of a savvy online. And it was actually his supporters who organized these money bombs. These would be one-day fundraising sprees in order to show just how big and how committed his base was, because he wasn't actually polling that well. So how were they going to show that he actually did have this massive support and that these were activists who were going to continue to help run and fund his campaign for as long as he needed? Well, these money bombs were a great way of doing that, because when they happened, journalists would just go gaga-eyed and write about how he was able to raise these obscene amounts of money.
And I suppose there's a little bit of backstory of, the 2004 campaign was the first one in which the internet started to play a real role. I have a whole spiel about how Howard Dean doesn't get enough credit for completely revolutionizing the DNC and so forth. But, 2007 into 2008 is really when candidates are taking the internet seriously, but it's still a bit of a novelty. And it's in late 2007 that Ron Paul starts to do these things we're talking about and do these sort of one-off. But it's very interesting to me, and Kellie, maybe you want to jump in here, but it still feels like there's this dynamic where it's the supporters who get the internet, especially, this dynamic with Ron Paul where he's an older guy and so forth. But, the supporters rallying and saying, no, pay attention to this thing. We want to do this thing, as opposed to the establishment really having their heads around it.
Yeah, the internet changes the game, no question. I mean, the idea of fundraising and having chicken dinners and banquet halls and doing like these extravagant, sort of fundraisers really changes when the internet takes off and people can connect with their followers via Twitter or social media. There are a lot of candidates, and not just, we think of Donald Trump in terms of social media, but before Donald Trump, this is really a chance not just to raise a lot of money, but to raise small sums of money by lots of people.
Yeah.
And I think that the 2004 story is important and the Ron Paul story is important for Clinton because, it's not that Hillary Clinton in 2008 had the youngest, most internet savvy base, but people had an opportunity to see how these money bombs work, to get more comfortable with giving small sums online. So by the time this rolls around, this is pretty late in the primary. We're talking June 2008. So her campaign is definitely on its last gasp. And so the idea that you're going to show that Clinton still has high levels of support, even as the winds are blowing against her, her supporters are able to look out and see how this has worked in the past so that they can apply it to her campaign and feel a little bit more comfortable with giving money online. Because you do have to kind of socialize people to putting their credit card number into the box on the internet. And that takes just some experience and witnessing other people do it.
That is a good reminder of the sort of contours of that 2008 primary, where I think it's clear, Obama felt like the internet candidate, and he was raising a lot of money online. And it was this moment and this notion that Clinton could rally online that did put a little bit of wind in her sails for at least a little bit into the summer. Just to tie up the Ron Paul thing, because I suppose we could have done this, we could have hooked this to this date as well. But the big money bomb that was the Ron Paul thing was in November, I believe, of 2007 on what's referred to as Guy Fawkes Day. We won't get too deep into the sort of internet lore of the movie V for Vendetta and Guy Fawkes and why certain libertarian corners of the internet picked up on that. But anyway, on Guy Fawkes Day, FAWKES, that was the day in November when the big Ron Paul money bomb thing happened, and it kind of got everyone's attention, and then there were a lot of copycats. It's funny, the copycats, because, Dennis Kucinich tried to do it, had a pretty good job. Fred Thompson, remember Fred Thompson? It didn't go so well, his attempts at it. So, part of it is just like, is there an authenticity to your crowd and connecting to the internet? Fred Thompson's crowd is probably more into the $1,500 a plate, rubbery chicken dinners.
Which actually gets at why this was so important for Clinton, right? Because it wasn't just that Obama was the internet candidate. He was the guy who had all the grassroots support. And Clinton was the establishment candidate. And she was the $5,000 a plate kind of fundraising candidate, even though Obama was raising tons of money from millionaires and hedge funds and all of those things. But she had to show that she had grassroots support. And so a money bomb like this can change the media narrative around a campaign.
Yeah. And it infuses, not just sort of an idea that a candidate is getting traction or is gaining in popularity, but it's a morale booster, to be able to show that, like, hey, listen, I am viable. People want me. People like me, right? People are donating to my campaign, and so you get these crazy numbers, especially, in the current moment that we live in. But, if we could go back, there's also like tons of examples of people doing earlier versions of these big drops and how much money is essential to campaigns.
What do you mean?
So I'm thinking about William McKinley. So William McKinley.
That's way back.
Yeah. So in his 1896 campaign, 19th century, he raised an exorbitant amount of money, $16 million. And this is in his campaign against William Jennings Bryan, which is a hugely contested campaign. Now, there's accusations. Okay, there's a lot of unethical behavior happening at this moment. But I think we really get to see how people started to court corporations, started to court big businesses, to get as many people as possible to see how much money their campaign could raise.
And that was actually really important in that campaign because William Jennings Bryan, in addition to being the Democratic candidate, was the Populist Party candidate. And so the idea that McKinley is raising all of this money from corporations really feeds into Bryan's attack that he is of the moneyed class and that he's in hock to financiers. And so at the time, there's not really a way to raise small money donations. There's no tradition of it. There's no nothing, right? Like you barely have candidates campaigning at this point, much less a fervent base giving them tons and tons of money. And it's not until you get innovations in direct mail in the 1960s and 70s and really the internet that makes it possible to give these small money donations without losing it all to the overhead that it takes to process them.
Yeah. Though there were, I don't know if you would call them direct mail, but there were kind of efforts a lot earlier than maybe people would imagine to at least collect voter information and use the mail to sort of reach voters one by one. And so, which is all to say this tension between raising a lot of money and accumulating a lot of power from one or a few small big sources versus doing it in this sort of scattered, more populist way. That's been there, I think, throughout American politics. This, I think, puts it in sharp relief, and it starts to raise this conversation about whether this is quote unquote more democratic. I mean, I think the instinct and when a lot of people talked about the money bomb at the time, they said, well, a bunch of small people gathering together to give money, there's not really a vacuum for corruption there, right? Because you're not beholden to a single donor or a single corporation. This is the digital soapbox, as a bunch of people put it. I'm curious what you make of that argument, and then certainly in the decades since, whether it feels like it's borne out that way, or what the other contours of that kind of giving, how that's changed things.
I do think it has democratized giving a little bit, in the sense that everybody can have access to the internet and give $5, $10. But I do worry about how this, plays out down the road, and how sustainable this is. Those are questions I always have about, like, how long can you keep something like this going when the pressure is to always have the bigger and bigger lead in terms of donations and amounts and surpassing that particular amount. But it also shows you that you can't win a campaign without money. There's a quote by Mark Hanna, who was the chief fundraiser for McKinley. He said, "There's two things that are important in politics. The first is the money, and the second I can't remember." But it shows you that is all. That's really all that matters if you want to win. And sometimes it still is not enough, even for those candidates who lose.
Yeah.
I will be bullish on the idea that it's democratized. I think that there's a real tendency to conflate the market and democracy, and they're two very different things. So I don't want to lean too heavily into that. There was this real sense that democracy was crumbling in 2010 when Citizens United was passed, and there was this real influx of dark money into politics and just of corporate giving and untraceable giving into politics. And this is happening at the same time that these money bombs are starting to surge, right? And so you have two stories that are going on side by side. One of all of this corporate cash flowing into politics, and then of all of these tiny donors. And depending on what story you want to tell about U.S. politics is the story that you emphasize. And somehow we have to keep those two ideas together in our minds. But I think all in all, billion-dollar presidential campaigns are probably not great for democracy. So there's an underlying problem either way.
Yeah. The other part of it that I think about is how, there is this massive trend towards nationalizing all politics. And I think the fact that anyone from any part of the country can chip in $5, $10, there's a presidential campaign, but now we're seeing obviously these tools are being used to just tons of money flooding into, a Georgia Senate race from all over the country, And I mean, on the one hand, that's wonderful. I think it gives a lot of people agency. It makes them feel like they can be involved in races that they may have been cut out from earlier. But it does also lead to this larger trend across politics, across media, across everything that I think is, because of the internet, that everything feels nationalized. Very few things feel like they're actually addressing local needs and local politics, which we should have politics that does that. This, I think, brings out some of that tension for me as well. And, and just I have a natural slight wariness of just anything that feels like a big rush and a big pylon, whatever you want to call it. And this occasionally, the money bomb has that, has that air about it.
But it's interesting, too, because some of these campaigns that you give to, they opt you in to give automatically every month. So you have to opt out.
Some of them.
In order, it's not.
You can say Donald Trump. I mean, that was the big reporting recently, right? I mean, yes. Yeah. You should go on. But yes, there's this whole world of sketchy tricks.
Oh, yeah.
Comes up because of this.
So you think you're giving $5, and really you're giving $5 every month unless you turn it off or unless you elect to not to give more than once, these reoccurring payments. So, I mean, you definitely have to read the fine print before you click submit on some of these things, because it's not often always just a one-time donation.
And that's a really good point. It just gives rise to this whole industry of consultants and sort of techniques to get people to give, those emails that I think everyone has gotten where it looks like, candidates writing you directly, I need your support right now. And there's this constant sense of urgency, this constant sense that everything is do or die in this moment and you have to give right now or else everything's going to fall apart, and we've seen those emails, we've seen those tricks, dirty or, just slightly unclean or whatever you want to call it. But yeah, there's this whole industry now of that stuff.
Democracy is an endless fundraising cycle.
That's right. That's right.
I think that's how the saying goes.
So but I do have a bit of a take that I've been thinking about this, and particularly about Trump. I mean, you mentioned, Kellie, that there was some reporting recently about how the Donald Trump campaign in 2020 did some really sketchy and illegal stuff in terms of people thinking they were signing up for a one-time donation and they were actually opting in for a weekly or monthly donation. And, some sort of heartbreaking stories of people clearing out their last few $1,000s to give to Trump's campaign. I think this is not reported. This is just, my sense of having watched politics and thought about this a bit. I think that there's a very good chance that a lot of Donald Trump's gaudy fundraising numbers were just made up or just BS or were juked in some sort of way. And I mean, I don't think that's actually that outrageous of a thing to say, that the Donald Trump campaign was maybe juking some stats and some numbers and cutting some corners. And I don't think there's any sort of journalistic incentives to go back and look into that. But I bet you if you just poked your head under the hood of those numbers that they were trotting out in terms of being...
Because it's a morale booster. You know that, look, 20 million people gave or whatever the numbers are.
And it gets headlines. And I feel like the press, even into 2020, was totally credulous when Donald Trump would send out a thing and be like, we got these ridiculous numbers of donors in one day and we raised all this money. And my sense is if you poked a little bit, it would all come apart. But that's just my sense. That's just me spouting off on a little podcast.
I don't know. I don't think we have any evidence that Donald Trump would ever be less than honest about the size of his support.
Yes, there you go.
Really veering off of the record there.
Okay. So let's end and do just a few of these also on this day. So as listeners know, we occasionally just touch on a few other things that happen on this day. So I'm going to rattle some off, and if you have anything of note to say. This was the day in 1918 that Eugene Debs was arrested on charges of denouncing the government, which was a violation of the Espionage Act of 1917. Eugene Debs, socialist and pacifist, serial runner for presidential office. Have we done a Eugene Debs?
I don't know if we have. And it's worth noting that he not only is arrested, but he's found guilty, and he runs for president in 1920 from prison.
Yeah,
there you go. So we will do a Eugene Debs. This was the day in 1945 that there was a 17-day newspaper strike in New York, and I believe we did do that episode last year. It all sort of blurs together, but I think you can go back and we did that episode last June. 1967, Robert Henry Lawrence Jr. was named the first black astronaut. I did not know this.
Yeah,
this was just on our big list of ideas. Yeah, amazing. We'll find a time to talk about him. And 1971, Ohio becomes the 38th state to approve of a lower voting age to 18, which ratifies the 26th Amendment, and 18-year-olds can vote starting from 1971 on. We've thought about, I think we should do an episode about the voting age. I think there's a big, interesting push to lower it even further. So we'll see.
Keep pushing it down.
I know.
Keep pushing it down. And so I will say, coming back to my very callous and shameless fundraising. Tidbits like these are what are included in our big list of ideas document, which you will get access to if you become a Radiotopia member. So now is the time. Become a Radiotopia member. Tell us you joined. We'll send you access to this big list of ideas. You will feel good about having supported our own little version of the Money Bomb. But anyway, that brings us to the end of the episode. Nicole Hemmer, thanks to you as always.
Thank you, Jody.
And Kellie Carter-Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
This Day in Esoteric Political History is a proud member of Radiotopia from PRX, a network of independent, listener-supported, artist-owned podcasts. Our researcher and producer is Jacob Feldman. Our producer is Brittany Brown. You can get in touch with us with any questions or comments or ideas for the show. Email us thisdaypod@gmail.com, or you can find a form at thisdaypod.com. My name is Jody Avergan. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you soon.
Radiotopia.